What's up, everybody? Thralls Mellow here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin, John.
And we have yet another album review for you guys. So one that was definitely on our radar just because we've been listening to this band pretty much since they came out, which was actually before this channel even took off, was the latest offering from Spectral Voice, Sparagmos. This comes out also on the 9th of February on Dark Descent Records. This band formed in 2012 in Denver, Colorado. This is only their second full length. Got into them with their first full length, Eroded Corridors of Unbeing, which is just flat out gross. I love that album. Absolutely murky and wonderfully dark and sinister. For those that don't know, this is flat out death doom, atmospheric death doom, bordering on funeral doom occasionally. Features members of Blood Incantation, Black Curse, and Chthonic Deity. And I've been eagerly anticipating this one just because I heard some of the lead-in tracks and I already had a hunch that this was going to be really good. And spoiler alert, I think this is really good. And maybe a little bit different than Eroded Corridors. I think this is even more atmospheric, if that is even possible to believe there, because, this band likes atmosphere.
I mean, it definitely is. I've been stoked once I saw this was coming out. You know, I'm a big fan of these guys anyway. This is right up my alley as far as music that I love. And yeah, this record is definitely, I think, more atmospheric. In fact, I think the focus of this record is more atmosphere than anything. And it's just a giant, dark, drippy, cavernous beast. It sounds like you're standing at the top of a well, and then the mic was placed at the bottom of the well, but the bottom of the well opens up into a cave. Yeah,
like a giant grotto that is dripping with things, slimy, maybe not water. There's ghouls living in it. They're all bummed out because they haven't seen the sun in like forever. From the start of this album, it moves slower than literally every line you've been stuck in at the DMV. It is plodding and labored. Kicks off with Cadaver, which that's kind of an eventuality anyway. But you have this sort of labored, droning riff. You have these clean melodies on top. Everything is loaded with reverb. Like, this album is huge and dark.
But it's not too much. It's not like an overbearing reverb. Like, normally when you get bands that like this cavernous sound, normally it's drenched so far in reverb that, like, reality doesn't even make sense anymore. Like, it's just the most cavernous thing ever. And while this is cavernous, it's not suffocatingly cavernous.
I mean, I'd still say it's suffocating, but I mean, it's musical. I mean, you can still listen to it. Like, there are parts on here that are just waves of layered, just chaotic screams of anguish and dissonant riffs. But I think this was also handled very well, namely because this was mixed and mastered and I think outright produced by one Arthur Risk, a name that more than likely we will bring up a lot this year, just like we brought him up last year.
Yep, if you're paying attention, I think this is the first time we brought up Arthur Risk, so we're going to start an active Arthur Risk count. This is number 1. We'll see what happens.
But Cadaver is almost kind of like, I don't know, like a moody setting. Like, this is the one that kind of sets the picture, which the picture is darkness lit maybe by candlelight, things moving around the shadows, these huge cavernous growls. There's a really good build-up to this song. Like, it starts off with these, like, single chugs and this really interesting stuttering sort of drum pattern.
I like that, actually. I like it. Just kind of gives it kind of like an off-put feeling, like, ba-da-da-da.
But as you go on, you get this, like, subtle build-up of feedback in the background, and you can kind of start making out, like, it's, all right, is that a tremolo? Is that something? And then all of a sudden, doom just hits you.
Now, these songs are all relatively long. There's only 4 of them, and they're each about 10 or 11 minutes apiece. It's not actually till you hit almost 7 minutes into this track that it even speeds up beyond the speed of your grandmother trying to get out of a 2-door sports car.
A lot of these songs are about, like, labored builds and, of course, that big, spacious atmosphere. Like, in between almost every transition, especially in the front half of this album, there seems to be a lot of drawn-out sections where not only do you hear, like, the next melody or riff building behind it, you're greeted to, again, waves of, like, just creepy, unsettling atmosphere, whether it's feedback or keys or vocals. The vocals on here are something else.
Some of the lowest growls I think I've ever heard. And that's a bold statement because a lot of death metal likes really low growls. But these, especially with all that reverb on them, like these are just really unnerving. I mean, this sounds like more evil than Satan himself.
I'm reasonably sure a big influence of this band is disembowelment, which, I mean, we brought that up when we did the retro review on that one. But the thing that they do in terms of the constant layering of vocals and different vocal styles, like not only do you have these deep cavernous growls, you have these more ghastly screams, and then every now and then you'll get these desperate pleading yells, which honestly, whenever those come in, it's like just instantly go, someone go check on that dude. I don't think he's doing well.
And the vocals, most times when they do this layering, sound like they're coming at you from all angles. Like there's a part in the last track, Death's Knell Rings in Eternity. Towards the end of that song, it sounds like they're coming at you from every conceivable angle. And keep in mind, it's dark as fuck, you can't see anything, but they're like, you can hear them in front of you and behind you, and then there's that whisper that lays over top, and you're like, come on, man.
That whisper is like close enough to the point where you can feel the breath on your ears. Yeah. And the whispers that also come in on Sinew Sensor, I think, are very effective. Again, lots of dynamics just moving at a very slow, methodical, monotonous, droning pace. But how they build tension in songs, I think, is excellent. The first two tracks, I would say, are definitely the most atmospheric out of the four tracks on here. There's a lot more like spacious, open areas between the heavy riffs. Like you have sections of blast beats and doom breakdowns, but in between there, you have these just very lush, just kind of, I don't know, ambient sounding, massive sections with, again, like layered growls, clean guitars on top of like heavy droning riffs. Again, very akin to like a lot of funeral doom bands, like Funeral Esoteric and stuff like that. In fact, the pace is often closer to funeral doom. But as this album goes on, it sort of shifts a little bit. Like it starts off, again, very just dreary and miserable as hell. Like not an ounce of light that, you know, shows up on this unless it's like a crack in the dungeon walls or something where the light pours in a little bit. And then someone throws a bucket of sludge and that's your dinner.
Why are you so depressed? Oh, I listened to the new Spectral Voice album.
I get it.
Yeah.
But as the album goes on, those spacious sections start to shrink and it starts getting notably more aggressive and heavy. And I'll just say like flat out evil. The last two tracks, there's just something about them that are way more dark and sinister and decidedly less sad. Like they just embraced the darkness and became it.
Embrace the darkness and the anger. Like the last two tracks get notably riffier too. Like it's not fast, but they're throwing more at you. There's a lot of low end tremolos, which I adore anyway. And then they start playing more with the harmonies. Like they always lay down this initial like single note melody that's real ambient and kind of alarming, but then they sneak these harmonies over top of them that just bring it back down into hell.
And to start off, like the riffs are really broken up. In fact, you know, there's a lot more atmosphere in terms of building up in the first half than there is in the second half, which makes sense because the atmosphere and the setting has already been established very thoroughly within the first two tracks, within the first track, honestly.
Yeah.
But as this album goes on, I like the fact that the riffs become more pronounced because this gets really riffy at times, like super riffy and unbelievably catchy too. The last riff that shows up at the end of Red Feasts Condensed into One, my God, like that was, well, not the first one that I thought was like, oh my God, that is like the sound of the end of the world, because believe me, the end of the world came a lot more often at the end too. But absolutely crushing, just evil crescendo, like where most bands will build to like a big epic crescendo, you know, kind of get that vibe of triumph. This one wants to make sure that you know that you are defeated. You are broken, busted, done, and this riff is there to pretty much bury you in a fucking wall someplace.
Yeah, that breakdown at the end of Red Feast Condensed into One is something else. Just gigantic, evil breakdown, just straight out of the Morbid Angel playbook, but slowed down to the tempo of cement drying.
And there's cool transitions between the tracks too. B Cadaver going into Red Feast condensed into one. B Cadaver ends in this, like, you get this sort of sporadic turnover that comes. And they have this droning, sort of haunting atmosphere behind it. And then that turnover turns into the just kick into that song, which opens up very aggressively. You get blast beats and tremolos, which blast beats do pop up on here very infrequently. Like, they are generally used as like a nice jarring tempo shift from the, you know, again, very slow labored pace of this. But before that song gets like too aggressive, it kind of cuts it off a bit and then goes into one of the weirdest atmospheric sections on the entire album. Everything kind of drops out and you get, again, this like droning ambience, but in there it sounds like there's like wind chimes, maybe a trumpet, and definitely ghosts. Like a choir of absolutely miserable spirits.
Like, just for a second, they took a page out of the Imperial Triumphant playbook.
Yeah, except, you know, no jazz.
Right.
Which, I'm kind of thankful for that because it was already weird enough without the jazz. But going into Sinew Sensor, like, there's almost an immediate shift in terms of the vibe of the album. Like, that one kicks off with an isolated, nasty riff, and then it just keeps building and getting more intense. And again, these atmospheric sections start shrinking down. And it's kind of that, like, sort of like being compressed and squeezed by this album. Like, by the end of it, it is pretty much fully enveloped you, like coils of a serpent around you, and it's just crushing the living shit out of you.
Right, like on Sinew Sensor, like, it's like somebody pushing you down and then stepping on your throat and little by little applying pressure. And then when you get to the last track, it's like the darkness has fully enveloped you, you're dying, or you're very close to it, and it's just like everything just swells.
And that definitely illustrates two things that I really loved about this album. The flow of it, where it has this very methodical pace, and again, that shifting vibe in the atmosphere going from, again, more forlorn and such to just flat out evil and dark. But as it's doing that, I feel like, you know, it kind of lures you in with B Cadaver. Like, it kind of shows you, like, oh, this is just dark and miserable, we're all sad. But you don't get to the teeth of this album until much later. And by the time you get to Death's Knell Rings in Eternity, it's too late. You're being just devoured whole by this absolute monster of a song. Like, it is the heaviest song on here, flat out. Like, there's just something about it that is just dirtier than hell.
It's absolutely vicious. They don't waste any time just smacking you right in the face with evil. It's heavy and it's chuggy, and the tremolos somehow get darker.
Yeah. In fact, I want to say, like, the other thing is the production. Because Arthur Risk, he's awesome. And this one really showcases some cool stuff in terms of, like, disorienting atmosphere. There's a lot of stuff that I feel like gets pushed to the front and then pulled back in the mix. You know, vocals, guitars, occasionally synths. Sometimes the ambience really takes over. And towards the end of this, a lot of the ambience starts getting kind of pulled back, and you're just getting hit over the head with the weight of these riffs. And these last two tracks kind of roll over you like a tidal wave of wet cement. Like, they are just so dense and heavy, and you kind of get that inescapable darkness vibe to them. And by the time you get to the end of Death's Knell Rings in Eternity, man, those church bells, that's your funeral. That is your funeral, that you're just trapped in that box and, yeah, you're about to be buried. But yeah, that whole vibe makes this such an awesome front to back listen. Like, I'm sure I could pick individual tracks on here and enjoy them thoroughly, but the front to back listen, like, I like that. Like, this has, like, an album you are supposed to listen from front to back to get the entire experience. And the entire experience is chilling at times.
Yeah, it's fully immersive from front to back, and that's what I like. Like, it starts off letting you know that it's going to be slow and brooding and dark and you're in for some shit, but it doesn't fully release all of what you're into until you get to the end. Like, you have to listen to it as a whole to get the entire vibe of everything. Like, I mean, I could sit down easily and listen to Red Feast condensed into one or Sinew Center and be perfectly happy. Like, those are two badass tracks. But to get the full effect, it's from front to back.
Yeah. This is like the opposite of, like, every movie trailer out there where they just show you all the good parts right away. This one's like, no, you have to kind of wait. This is a slow burn.
You have to endure.
Yeah. And as far as, like, any negatives on here, I really can't think of much outside of B Cadaver is kind of a slow start. It's more of a setting. Like, it sets more of the atmosphere. It does take a little while to build into those heavier parts. So if you are more of an impatient listener and you want to kind of get down to that just super heavy, doomy riffage, you're going to have to be patient with it. But as it goes on, it gets a lot better. And then, the whole album after that, I really don't have any complaints. Like, God, this is just absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, I don't really either. I would agree that the first track, Be Cadaver, is a slow goer. And had the entire record been like that, I think it still would have been good, but I don't think it would have been as good if they hadn't built upon that initial meet and greet, so to speak.
Yeah, like any good movie, you need establishing shots, character development, all that stuff. And that is what Be Cadaver is. It is the establishing shots, the character development, and getting the story rolling. And by the time you get down to the last track, everyone in the cast is dead. Like, literally everyone. Their dog, too. Like, it's that bleak. So overall, I'm going to give this 4.5 stars. I was completely immersed in this, like just completely just sucked into this absolutely miserable world that this album creates. This is possibly, I don't know, like more atmospheric and more lush than the first one, but it still packs like a sizable punch. Like the dynamics in here are absolutely on point. Risk's production is masterful, like just in terms of handling all the dense layering on here. It is just bleak as hell, like suffocating, but I love how this album flows. Like it kind of lures you in with just the misery and all the just dreariness it possibly can, and then really kind of just pulls you into the teeth of the album, which again is the last 2 tracks in here where it just absolutely crushes you. Your body is mulch by the end of this album. If you were a big fan of esoteric, disembowelment, funeral, skepticism, just crushing death doom in general, but also death doom with a lot of atmosphere to it, strongly recommend checking this one out. And if you haven't checked out the first one too, check that one out too, because it's also awesome.
I'm going to go ahead and give this 4 stars. It's really, really, really good. I love Spectral Voice anyway. The first track kind of took away a little bit for me at the beginning just because it was so slow to get going, and I was like, man, this is kind of a chore. That being said, though, it does set up the rest of the album pretty nicely, again, when you think about it as a whole. When you get into this record, it's crushing. It's like throwing yourself into a wood chipper. Like, it just over and over and over again, the punches keep coming. It just gets heavier and darker, and
that's your Groundhog Day.
Yeah, right. Why couldn't I live that day over and over and over? Having heard Arthur Risk produce any number of albums over the last couple of years, I think this is some of his finest work. Just the way he's got everything dialed in and tuned in, so the reverb and the atmosphere just slowly takes over. It's like a gray cloud that just slowly gets more dense and dense and dense, and by the end you're suffocated under the weight of the atmospheric changes. This is a good record, and when it's heavy, it is the heaviest thing you quite possibly have ever heard. I love the vocal dynamic. Again, having things come at you from all angles is a very unsettling experience, but it just adds to the overwhelming evil feeling of this album. If you're a fan of disembowelment, funeral doom, but done through the eyes of mortiferum and fossilization, you're probably going to really like this record. I would recommend checking this out, and of course their last record as well. These guys kick ass on all angles. This is definitely a good album. Please check it out for yourself.
So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsofmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel in the right-hand corner of our banner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com, because that is where we have new shirts. We have old shirts that are discounted, provided we have your size. And we also have hats. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
And as always, if you're still watching this part of the video, this is where we thank you. We have tons of stuff coming, as always. Album reviews up the wazoo. We're only in February right now. We've got discography rankings coming. We're about to film the Black Dahlia murder, and then after that, Meshuggah. We have Nick's collection updates. I promise you guys, What's John Jamming will come back. I'm not even going to get into it, but yeah, we do all this for you guys because we genuinely appreciate you. You guys have been with us, a lot of you, for the last 5 years, which is crazy to think about that we've been doing this for so long, but we keep doing it because we appreciate you guys, and you guys show us some love and we show it right back. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. I know we say the same stuff at the end of these videos, but we made it because, yeah, it's become, like, again, a huge part of our lives. Once again, tons of stuff coming in the future, but for now, I'm just going to thank you one more time because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.